The year is 356 BCE, and the greatest temple in the ancient world is burning. Flames leap into the night sky over Ephesus as 120 years of architectural mastery crumbles into ash and ruin. But this isn't a natural disaster or an accident of war. This is deliberate destruction, set by a single man whose name would echo through history for the worst possible reason. As the Temple of Artemis burns, something else is being born that same night, 200 miles away in Macedonia. A child named Alexander, who would conquer the known world and later offer to rebuild what was lost. Welcome to the extraordinary story of the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, a monument so magnificent that ancient writers called it the most wonderful building ever created by human hands. For over 8 centuries, this colossal temple dominated the skyline of one of the world's greatest cities, attracting pilgrims, merchants, and conquerors from every corner of the Mediterranean. It was built, destroyed, and rebuilt multiple times, each version more spectacular than the last, until Christianity finally silenced its ancient goddess forever. This is the story of divine ambition, human genius, religious fanaticism, and the eternal struggle between old gods and new. It's the tale of how a single temple became the beating heart of an empire, and how that heart was finally torn from its body. But most importantly, it's the story of what happens when mortals try to build paradise on earth. Our story begins not in Ephesus, but in the mountains of Anatolia, where a goddess older than Greece itself held sway over wild beasts and untamed lands. Long before Greek colonists ever set foot on Asia Minor's coast, the people of this region worshipped a powerful mother goddess, a deity of fertility, hunt, and the fierce protection of the vulnerable. When Greek settlers arrived in the 8th century BCE and established the city of Ephesus, they encountered this ancient worship and recognized something familiar. Their own goddess Artemis, virgin huntress and protector of women in childbirth, seemed to share many attributes with this mysterious Anatolian deity. But the fusion that occurred was unlike anything else in the Greek world. The Artemis of Ephesus became something unique, a goddess who combined Greek mythology with Eastern mysticism, virgin purity with fertility symbolism, wilderness protection with urban prosperity. Unlike her counterparts elsewhere in Greece, Artemis of Ephesus was depicted covered in what appeared to be eggs or perhaps multiple breasts, symbols of her role as a nurturer and life-giver. She was simultaneously the huntress who roamed wild forests and the mother goddess who blessed crops and childbirth. This religious synthesis would shape everything that followed. The early temples dedicated to this hybrid goddess were modest affairs, built of wood and simple stone. But as Ephesus grew in wealth and importance, becoming a crucial trading hub between East and West, its citizens began to dream of something grander. The goddess who protected their city deserved a temple that would announce Ephesus's greatness to the world. What they couldn't have imagined was that their temple would outlast their civilization and become the measuring stick by which all other ancient monuments would be judged. The transformation began around 550 BCE when Croesus, the famously wealthy king of Lydia, conquered Ephesus. Rather than destroying the city, Croesus recognized its strategic and commercial value. More importantly, he seems to have genuinely respected the local worship of Artemis. According to Herodotus, Croesus dedicated many columns to a new, massive temple project. Archaeological evidence supports this account. Excavations have revealed a column drum bearing the inscription dedicated by Croesus, providing rare physical proof of the legendary king's involvement. But Croesus's contribution was more than financial. The Lydian conquest brought Ephesus into contact with the broader world of Eastern luxury and architectural ambition. Lydian gold, Persian engineering techniques, and Greek artistic genius combined to create something unprecedented. The Ephesians weren't just building a temple. They were creating a statement that would challenge every other city in the Mediterranean to match their achievement. The architect chosen for this monumental task was Chersiphron of Knossos, possibly working with his son Metagenes. These were not unknown figures taking on an experimental project. They were master builders whose reputations were already established throughout the Greek world. They faced challenges that would have daunted lesser architects. The site chosen for the temple was marshy ground, prone to earthquakes, near a river that regularly flooded. Conventional foundations would never support the massive structure they envisioned. Their solution was ingenious and unprecedented. Theodorus of Samos, the engineer responsible for the foundations, created a layered system that modern earthquake engineering would recognize as brilliant. The base consisted of alternating layers of packed charcoal and sheepskins, materials that would compress and absorb seismic shock while distributing the enormous weight of the structure above. Recent archaeological investigations have confirmed the presence of charcoal layers, though the sheepskins mentioned by Pliny the Elder have not survived the millennia. The temple that rose from these innovative foundations was unlike anything the ancient world had ever seen. At 129.5 meters long and 68.6 meters wide, it was nearly double the size of the Parthenon in Athens. But size alone doesn't convey the temple's revolutionary impact. This was a building designed to overwhelm the senses and challenge visitors' understanding of what human beings could accomplish. 127 columns, each standing 18.3 meters high and 1.2 meters in diameter, created a forest of marble that dwarfed human scale. These weren't simple support pillars. Each column was a work of art in itself. The columns facing the temple's entrance were carved with relief sculptures depicting scenes from Greek mythology, transforming structural elements into narrative masterpieces. Visitors approaching the temple would find themselves walking through a gallery of stone storytelling before they even entered the sacred space. The decorative program of the temple was comprehensive and sophisticated. The frieze running around the building depicted Amazons, the legendary warrior women who, according to Greek mythology, had once sought refuge at Ephesus from Hercules. This wasn't arbitrary decoration. It connected the temple to the mythical history of its location while celebrating the fierce, independent nature of Artemis herself. The Amazon frieze became one of the most copied artistic motifs in the ancient world, inspiring sculptors and architects for centuries to come. Inside the temple, the cult statue of Artemis presented visitors with a figure unlike any other representation of Greek divinity. Carved from cedar wood, chosen for its resistance to decay and its sacred associations, the statue showed Artemis covered in symbols that merged Greek and Eastern religious traditions. The multiple egg-like protrusions covering her torso have been interpreted as eggs, breasts, or even bull testicles, all symbols of fertility and life-giving power. This was not the simple virgin huntress familiar from other Greek cities, but a complex deity who embodied the mysteries of life and death, creation and destruction. The engineering challenges of building such a massive structure led to innovations that influenced architecture for centuries. The architrave blocks, the massive stone beams that connected the columns, weighed 24 tons each. Moving and positioning these enormous pieces required lifting technology that pushed ancient engineering to its limits. According to Vitruvius, the architects developed a system of inclined planes and pulleys that could raise these massive stones to their required height. The precision required was extraordinary. A miscalculation could have brought the entire structure crashing down. The temple's completion around 430 BCE marked the culmination of over a century of continuous construction. 3 generations of workers had devoted their lives to the project. Grandfathers who had laid the first stones never lived to see the final decorative elements installed. The completed temple represented not just architectural achievement, but cultural continuity on a scale that modern societies struggle to match. The economic impact of the temple was transformative for Ephesus. Pilgrims came from across the Mediterranean, bringing wealth that supported entire industries. Silversmiths created miniature replicas of the temple and the goddess for visitors to take home. Priests, merchants, innkeepers, and guides all prospered from the constant flow of religious tourism. The temple treasury, filled with offerings from wealthy devotees, became a crucial source of credit for trade and urban development. Ephesus grew into one of the largest cities in the ancient world, rivaling Alexandria and Antioch in population and prosperity. But the temple was more than an economic engine. It was a religious experience that transformed visitors' understanding of the divine. Ancient accounts describe pilgrims weeping at their first sight of the temple, overwhelmed by its scale and beauty. The building was designed to create a sense of transcendence, to make mortals feel they were entering the realm of the gods. The play of light and shadow among the columns, the sound of wind moving through the massive structure, the incense and music of daily rituals, all combined to create an atmosphere that modern visitors to great cathedrals might recognize. The religious practices centered at the temple were complex and sophisticated. Artemis was served by a hierarchy of priests and priestesses, including the famous Megabixos, a high priest whose office was hereditary and who wielded enormous political influence throughout the region. The temple maintained sacred prostitutes, as was common in Eastern fertility cults, though the exact nature of these practices remains debated by scholars. What's clear is that the temple ritual calendar was extensive and elaborate, with festivals, processions, and sacrifices that drew participants from hundreds of miles away. The temple also served as a sanctuary in the legal sense. Criminals who reached the temple grounds could claim asylum, protected by the goddess from earthly justice. This right of sanctuary extended in a circle around the temple, and the boundaries were marked by stone posts. Over time, various rulers expanded this sacred area for political reasons, sometimes encompassing the entire city. The sanctuary rite made Ephesus a haven for political refugees, intellectual dissidents, and anyone fleeing the rough justice of ancient legal systems. The artistic influence of the temple spread throughout the ancient world. The distinctive Ionic order columns, with their elegant spiral volutes, became the preferred style for temples throughout the Greek sphere. The sculptural program, especially the Amazon frieze, was copied and adapted by artists across the Mediterranean. Coins from dozens of cities featured images inspired by the temple's architecture and decorations. The building established aesthetic standards that influenced everything from individual sculptures to entire city plans. Then came the night that changed everything. On July 21, 356 BCE, a young man named Herostratus entered the temple and set it ablaze. His motivation, according to ancient sources, was simple and chilling. He wanted to be remembered forever, and he calculated that destroying something beautiful and irreplaceable would achieve that immortality. The fire spread rapidly through the wooden elements of the structure. The roof collapsed, statues cracked in the heat, and 120 years of artistic achievement was reduced to blackened ruins in a single night. The coincidence that Alexander the Great was born on the same night the temple burned was not lost on ancient writers. Plutarch records that Persian priests in Ephesus interpreted the fire as a portent of disaster for Asia, running through the streets and beating their faces while crying that a great calamity had been born. The symbolism seemed almost too perfect. As the old temple died, the conqueror who would reshape the eastern Mediterranean was taking his first breath. But the destruction of the temple was not its end. It was its transformation. The Ephesians immediately began planning a replacement that would surpass even the original. This wasn't mere civic pride, but religious necessity. The goddess required a home, and her worshippers required a space for their devotions. The new temple would prove that neither human malice nor divine wrath could permanently defeat their devotion. The rebuilding project attracted support from across the Greek world. When Alexander himself visited Ephesus in 334 BCE, he offered to finance the completion of the new temple in exchange for a dedicatory inscription bearing his name. The Ephesians' response was diplomatically brilliant. They told the young conqueror that it was not appropriate for one god to dedicate gifts to another god. Alexander was sufficiently flattered by being called a god that he didn't insist on the inscription, and the Ephesians maintained control of their temple while avoiding offense to the most powerful man in the world. The second temple followed the same basic design as the first, but incorporated improvements and refinements learned from the original's construction. The platform was raised higher, making the temple more visually impressive and providing better drainage. The sculptural program was updated to reflect contemporary artistic styles while maintaining the traditional themes that connected the building to its predecessor. The new temple was slightly smaller than Croesus's version, but arguably more beautiful, incorporating the refined proportions and decorative elements that characterized Hellenistic architecture at its finest. The completed second temple served the goddess and the city for over 6 centuries. It survived the Roman conquest of Asia Minor, adapting to new political realities while maintaining its religious and economic importance. Roman emperors, understanding the temple's significance to regional stability and prosperity, generally supported its operations and even contributed to its maintenance. The temple treasury continued to function as a regional bank, lending money to merchants and cities throughout Asia Minor. During the Roman period, the temple faced new challenges as traditional Greek religion encountered mystery cults, philosophy, and eventually Christianity. The appeal of Eastern religions grew among Romans seeking spiritual experiences more intense than traditional civic cults provided. Artemis of Ephesus, with her Eastern origins and elaborate ritual calendar, actually benefited from this trend initially. Her worship spread throughout the Roman Empire, with temples and shrines dedicated to Artemis Ephesia appearing in cities from Britain to Egypt. The temple's wealth and influence made it a target for various forms of exploitation. Provincial governors sometimes borrowed heavily from the temple treasury for public works or personal enrichment. Pirates and bandits occasionally threatened pilgrims traveling to Ephesus, forcing the temple to maintain its own security forces. Political upheavals regularly disrupted the trade that supported the temple's economy. Yet through all these challenges, the institution adapted and survived, demonstrating the resilience that had allowed it to outlast empires and conquerors. The rise of Christianity posed a different kind of challenge. Unlike political conquest or economic disruption, this was an ideological threat that questioned the very foundations of the temple's existence. Christian missionaries, particularly the Apostle Paul, explicitly challenged the worship of Artemis. Paul's visit to Ephesus around 54 CE sparked riots as local silversmiths, whose livelihoods depended on selling religious artifacts to pilgrims, organized resistance to his preaching. The incident, recorded in Acts 19, provides a vivid snapshot of the economic and religious tensions created by Christianity's spread. The conflict between Christianity and the cult of Artemis was not merely theological but cultural and economic. The temple represented continuity with ancient traditions, local identity, and prosperity that had lasted for centuries. Christianity demanded the abandonment of these traditions in favor of a foreign god, whose followers condemned the artistic and cultural achievements that were the city's pride. The struggle was between two complete worldviews, not just competing religious claims. For over 3 centuries, traditional religion at Ephesus managed to coexist with growing Christian influence. The temple continued to function, though probably with diminished resources and fewer pilgrims. Archaeological evidence suggests that maintenance declined during the 3rd and 4th centuries CE, with some restoration projects left incomplete. The building was showing its age, and the community resources available for its upkeep were clearly reduced. The decisive blow came not from theological argument, but from political power. When Emperor Theodosius I issued decrees against pagan practices in 393 CE, the legal foundation for the temple's operation was destroyed. The Olympic Games ended that same year, and temples throughout the empire were forced to close or convert to Christian use. At Ephesus, the response was swift and violent. In 401 CE, a Christian mob stormed the temple and began its systematic destruction. The demolition of the temple was thorough and deliberate. The mob didn't simply damage the building, they sought to erase it. Statues were smashed, inscriptions were defaced, valuable materials were stripped away for use in Christian buildings. The cult statue of Artemis, which had stood in the temple for over 7 centuries, was destroyed so completely that no fragments have ever been found. The great library attached to the temple, containing centuries of religious texts, philosophical works, and administrative records, was burned. In a few days, a millennium of continuous religious and cultural activity was terminated. The practical destruction of the temple was followed by natural forces that completed its erasure. The river Castros, which had always threatened the site with flooding, gradually changed its course and deposited layers of silt over the ruins. Earthquakes damaged the remaining structures. Without maintenance, the great columns toppled and were covered by earth and vegetation. Within a few centuries, the exact location of the temple was forgotten. The loss of the temple marked the end of Ephesus as a major city. Without the pilgrimage trade that had supported its economy for over 8 centuries, the population declined rapidly. The harbor silted up, making maritime trade difficult. Political power shifted to Constantinople, leaving Ephesus as a provincial backwater. By the time the Turks conquered the region in 1304 CE, the once great city was little more than a village surrounded by mysterious ruins. Medieval legends attempted to preserve some memory of the temple's magnificence. Byzantine writers claimed that columns from the Temple of Artemis had been incorporated into Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, though modern scholarship has proven this impossible. The Islamic conquest of the region brought new legends that identified the temple ruins with various Quranic stories. But these were just stories. The actual knowledge of what the temple had been and why it mattered was lost. The rediscovery of the temple in the 19th century was driven by European fascination with the seven wonders of the ancient world. John Turtle Wood, working for the British Museum, spent years searching for the temple's location using ancient literary sources and educated guesswork. When he finally found the site in 1869, what he uncovered was both magnificent and heartbreaking. Enough sculptural fragments and architectural elements to confirm the temple's legendary beauty, but so little remaining that the building's actual appearance had to be reconstructed through scholarly detective work. The archaeological investigation of the site revealed the temple's construction history in remarkable detail. Multiple building phases were identified, from the earliest wooden temples through Croesus's marble masterpiece to the Hellenistic reconstruction. The innovative foundation system was uncovered and studied, providing insights into ancient engineering techniques that modern construction still admires. Thousands of artifacts were recovered, including jewelry, coins, sculptures, and inscriptions that tell the story of 8 centuries of continuous worship. Perhaps the most significant discovery was a magnificent column drum from the Hellenistic temple, carved with figures including Hades, Persephone, and Hermes. Now in the British Museum, this single piece conveys something of the artistic mastery that ancient writers struggled to describe in words. The delicate carving, the sophisticated composition, and the technical skill required to create such work in marble demonstrates why the temple was considered one of the wonders of the ancient world. But for all the archaeological success, the temple's physical remains are disappointing to modern visitors. Only foundations and a single reconstructed column mark the site where once stood the greatest temple in the ancient world. The contrast between the literary descriptions and the visible remains is jarring. Visitors must use their imaginations to populate the empty space with forest of columns, elaborate sculptures, and crowds of ancient pilgrims. The story of the Temple of Artemis is ultimately about the impermanence of even the greatest human achievements. For over 8 centuries, the temple seemed eternal, surviving conquests, fires, earthquakes, and social upheavals. Its destruction reminds us that no institution, however powerful or beloved, is guaranteed survival. The forces that destroyed the temple, religious fanaticism, cultural transformation, political change, are still active in our world today. Yet the temple's influence outlasted the building itself. The architectural innovations pioneered in its construction influenced building design for centuries. The artistic standards established by its sculptors shaped Western aesthetic traditions. The religious synthesis that created Artemis Ephesus demonstrated how different cultures could find common ground in shared spiritual seeking. Most importantly, the temple proved that human beings, working together with vision and dedication, could create beauty that inspired reverence across cultures and centuries. Today, as we face our own challenges of cultural preservation, religious tolerance, and architectural ambition, the Temple of Artemis offers both inspiration and warning. It shows us what becomes possible when communities commit resources and creativity to projects larger than individual lifetimes. It also reminds us how quickly intolerance and violence can destroy what patience and skill created. The temple may be gone, but its lesson remains. The greatest human achievements come not from individual genius, but from sustained collective effort guided by shared vision. Whether we're building temples or cities, creating art or preserving culture, we succeed when we think beyond ourselves and work toward goals that will outlast our individual lives. The goddess may have been forgotten, but the human capacity for creating wonder lives on.